Hey guys, I just wanted to show you something I put together fairly quickly using the new stacks feature of the AutoLayout plugin for Sketch. This plugin is really cool. With this new addition, we can now do something like FlexBox grids inside of Sketch to do better responsive design. And I'll get more into that in a little bit, but I kind of wanted to show you that what I have here is a page. And as you see, when I resize down, the row resizes as well. That's not anything new. And then when I go make this larger, it's you'll see that the header and the footer grow in size, but the main content area stays the same because it has a max width of 1200 pixels. Now the cool part is that here we have inside of the main, we have a row. Oh, and by the way, it helps if you know FlexBox to kind of think about the layout in that sense. But even if you don't, it's still pretty easy to follow. We have a row here, and when we duplicate the row, you'll see that immediately we have another row, and there is essentially a 30 pixel padding or margin between the first row and the second row. And you'll see also that the footer has also been pushed down. So at this stage, we can see that the content inside the main behaves very similar to the DOM, to HTML and CSS, where if this grows in height, then what's below will get pushed down, and that's really cool. And one way to fix this view right now, since we have the footer off the screen, is to simply hit resize to fit on the artboard size, and you can keep doing this whenever you make changes to your designs. So another cool thing about this is if we look inside the row, and here's one row, I'm going to go ahead and delete this one for now to not create confusion. And you'll see that when I go inside the row, there are 3 columns. Now I can easily rearrange these through drag and drop, but it might actually be more precise or easier to simply select a column and then go ahead and align it to the right. If I want to move this one all the way to the right, you'll see that it's off the view, but as soon as I click back inside, I'll readjust, and there we have the red now on this side. And you can do this for the blue as well. And you'll see now the blue is on this side. That's pretty cool. Now, another really awesome feature of this plugin is that you can go inside, and if you duplicate the row, you'll immediately see that it behaves very much like FlexBox, and it'll just create another box. And by the way that that's done is you have this option here for how you specify whether the stacking order is vertical or horizontal. In this case, it's horizontal, and you see that all of the items are aligned to the top. This is very similar to the way that FlexBox works. I'll show you an example of this later on. Now the spacing is 16 pixels, and that means 16 pixels between each of the boxes or the columns in this scenario. If it was vertical, then it would be 16 pixels in between boxes going vertically down. So, and of course, if you go ahead and delete a column and click away, you'll see that it readjusts to 3 columns now. You can do this and get one more, and boom, we got 2. Okay, at this point, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and create a few more rows and columns to kind of generate a layout. So I'm gonna duplicate my row, and then when I go inside the column, I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this column, and so now we have 3, and then go ahead and duplicate another row. And as you see, the footer is getting pushed out of view, and of course you can always resize to fit, but in this case, since we're building out the page, I'm going to go ahead and extend the artboard height so I have a lot more to see and work with. Okay, so back to the row, I'm going to go ahead and select this column and delete it, and then I'll delete this one, and then we'll have a full width column. And maybe do one more duplicate here, and then I'm going to make this one come below, and then I'm going to select the column here and duplicate it one more time. So there we have 4. Now, something that is also really cool is that you can have stacked groups within stacked groups, so sort of nested logic. And here, as you can see from the row, we have a logic that is horizontal and aligned to the top with 16 pixel padding in between each box. But at the column level, say we open up go ahead and collapse these real quick. Say I open up the first column here. Inside each column, there's this notion of a module. Now the module can be any content type that you want it to be. It could be an image, it could be a button, a table, a list, a grouped component. And primarily the way that I would use it is a symbol that is constructed with sketch resize properties, as well as AutoLayout's center align and those sorts of things, so that we make components, symbol components that are almost unbreakable. And the cool thing is that the width of these components will be defined by the width of the column. But I'll get more into that at a later part. For here, I just wanted to show you that when we have a column and we have a module, if we duplicate the module, you'll see now that it's still residing inside the column. And you can go ahead and select a different column here and duplicate this module. And now you have this sort of cool way of stacking different content types inside of one column. Now, the way that this works is pretty straightforward as well. You look into the column as properties, and you see that it's aligned vertically, and that should probably be 16 pixels padding, and aligned that way. So cool. So now you'll see that you can go into the modules and actually just right click and replace with a symbol. In this case, I'm going to do this with a callout. Now, zoom in a little bit there. You can do this with any of the module boxes that are inside columns. And so for this example, I'm going to go ahead and also replace it with another callout. Now, here's something that's interesting. The spacing, or the alignment rather, of the individual columns is very similar to FlexBox, and you can go in and right here and see that it's actually aligned to the top. You can align it to the center, you can align it to the bottom, or if you want to, you can have it equalize or grow in height. And that's that option there. So I'm going to go ahead and actually undo a few times. Say that I wanted to replace this item here, this module, with a table row. Now the table row is actually closer to a list item in this view, but for the presentation it'll do. Then I can go into this module, and if you guys are familiar with Craft, which you should be, I've gone ahead and actually pre-populated this this symbol with mock data that I downloaded from the web, from this JSON file, and I selected a JSON object. And I can go in here and say duplicate vertically 5 times, 0 space gutter, and it'll auto-populate accordingly with different data sets or different parts of the data set. And you'll still see that it's actually still aligned to the center. And if I wanted at this point for everything to fill in nicely, I could go in here and say at the row level to just equalize the height. Now I'm going to go ahead and actually change this item here and replace that with a button. Button is aligned to the top, and actually what we can do here is say, you know what, I want everything to be aligned to the middle. And because there's different numbers of modules inside each columns, you'll see how they vertically align. If you actually just wanted the button to align to the columns, you would just, in a single row, you could just take a row like this and replace it with a button, and then say row align to the center. So we would be able to do something like that as well. It's really cool, very flexible. And of course your symbols, you can still, edit them in any way. And so it would be up to you how you would define the logic and the complexity of each symbol so that you have enough flexibility in this kind of system. And then of course you could change your background color and what have you. So cool. Then I'm gonna go ahead and resize to fit. Oh, there's one more thing. So I've gone ahead and prepared a better demo to show you sort of the flexibility of this approach and how easy it is to go from desktop to mobile. So here's an artboard. What we're going to do is we're just going to duplicate it. And we're zoomed out here, but we can see that it's roughly 1400 pixels. And we're going to change that to, say, 400. And when I click into the artboard, everything resizes, which is already pretty cool. But you'll see that the columns are squished and, in a way, not very useful. But the fix is very simple with AutoLayout in stacks. All we need to do is select the stack and change the orientation from horizontal to vertical. And you'll see that the box is pushed down and readjust. And we can do that for all the rows in our layout. And I think I'm going to go ahead and resize to fit to see more of the artboard. For this row, we probably don't need to do it, but for consistency, let's just go ahead. And for the last row, I'm going to change that to vertical. And you'll see that items are getting pushed out of the artboard. So again, we can just resize to fit. And here already we have a pretty cool mobile view that was just generated in a matter of a few clicks. Now, as you see, the page is fairly long, and we can go and select entire rows and resize as we see necessary. We can also select columns and resize those down individually, and everything just auto adjusts. If we wanted to, we could play with the body and essentially the spacing between the header and the footer and the content area. So for this example, maybe we want to make it down to like 50 and about that closer, 30, whatever seems natural. And that happens as well in the footer space. I'm going to go ahead and select the artboard, resize to fit, and well, maybe play around with this whole space here. Resize that down, boom. Resize to fit. And just like that, in a few clicks, we have the desktop and mobile view. And of course, you can go in here and do symbol swapping as well if you feel that the mobile view should have a different component. But for the most part, everything works as you'd expect, and it's pretty straightforward. Now that you get that general approach, I want to surface a potential issue with this technique. If you notice over here, we have a row with 3 columns, and there's a spacing or a gap between them that amounts to 32 pixels each. Now, when you try to do something like that with an uneven number of, or uneven distribution of widths in the columns, such as a 4 and an 8, you'll see that I have this red line here that shows us that because there are 2 spacings over here, the plugin doesn't necessarily know how to calculate that spacing properly, and you'll see that things misalign, as you can see right here. Now, the workaround that I've discovered is actually to take every row, and where it says spacing 32, actually compress that down to 0, and what that will do is you get something like that. And you can do the same over here. Change that to 0. So now you'll see that, let me change the color here. The first and the second rows are aligning. So the trick here to actually create this kind of look where everything lines up perfectly is, instead of assigning the spacing to the row, you assign it to the component or your symbol instead. And what that looks like in AutoLayout is actually saying, make this have 16 pixels padding from the left and the right. And so if I turn this off, you'll see that we can actually grow this out. So this is really flexible because if I wanted to, I can say, well, I actually need more padding. I want this to be 32 on this and 32 over here. And you can achieve any sort of combination in that sense. And you can do this by, say that you wanted to change an entire row. You can just click into the component, shift click, shift command click, and select all of them, and then you can change all the spacings at the same time. So 32 and 32. And you'll see now, of course, things don't quite line up underneath anymore because those have to be changed as well. But for the most part, this is an approach that will make sure that the math for uneven number of rows and columns lines up. As you see, I'm going to bring this over. You know, everything is working as expected. And even down here. Say that I like this column distribution and I want to use it for some other part of the project down the road. You can see here that I have a 25-75% split, or in the way that AutoLayout handles it, a 100 and 300 sort of percentage or ratio. And what I can do is I can take it here and I can go to craft, and in the library I can actually just save this as its own row. And so later, if I wanted to, I could just drag and drop it into any other page, as long as it's within a similar format. Okay, so what I want to talk about next is how I define the patterns of the padding or margins that are involved in the grid. So as you can see here, in between each column, there's about a 32 pixel gap. In between each row, there's also 32 pixel gaps. When I go inside a row and then inside a column, and I get to the modules, you'll notice that there's only 16 pixels between these. And that's intentional. That's to show that that is a grouping of modules inside of a column. So what I want to do next is cover how the template has evolved since the beginning of the video, kind of give you a rundown of the structure again, and sort of the advantages that we have figured out along the way. So still here we have a body, main, and a footer. That much hasn't changed. But inside the main we have two folders for section 1 and section 2. Section 1 you see highlighted right here. If I open up section 1, you'll notice that we have a row group, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It groups together all the rows. Now the reason why this is here, or rather why there's a section 1 folder and this isn't just a section 1 anymore, is because there's this notion of being able to compress the row using pinning. And if you look right here to the inspector, you'll see that I'm actually pinning it 0 pixels to the left and 0 pixels to the right. But then there's this box sizing that says, well, the width is 100%, so in this case 1200 pixels, as that was the maximum width that we defined for the document, or rather for the main part of the layout. But why this is useful is actually more clear in section 2. But before we get there, if you recall, the reason why this padding exists right here is because it's contained within each module. Each module has its own, or rather each component has its own 16 pixel padding on the left, 16 pixel padding on the right. But what if we wanted to have all of these boxes actually collapse their padding and touch each other? Well, there's a way to do that, and let's take a look at section 2. So section 2 here, you'll see that, I'm going to go ahead and change this color real quick. You'll see that everything is touching, and yet everything is still aligning to the top. And the reason why that works, again, is because at the row group, we specified 16 pixels pinning, or distance from the right and distance from the left. So normally what that would do is actually say that this is no longer 1200 pixels. And when this shrinks, the section 2 group would also shrink, and that would throw off the entire alignment. However, because we have this box sizing that is set to 0% and 0 pixels pinning left and right with 100% width, it actually prevents the section 2 group from shrinking down in size. Therefore, we can now achieve this look. Otherwise, without it, the box would shrink. This entire section 2 would shrink down, or we would have a box that breaks outside of its bounds, like so. So this is sort of the workaround that I've come up with that I think works across all the scenarios, hopefully. And you could even increase it further if you wanted to, and it would still center and align itself. And as you can see, the boxes, they do align. It's just that we are increasing the padding of the row group without affecting the width of the section. So I'm going to go ahead and default this back to 16 and 16 and talk about once things are converted to mobile, this actually gives us more flexibility because we can say, okay, well, there's a 16 pixel padding on the left and in between each of the columns, or you can just say collapse it this way, vertically collapse. Or if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can have it go edge to edge, so collapsing vertically and horizontally. And the way that this is done is just like the example above, where we have the row group, and we've gone ahead and collapsed all the padding and all of the pinning for each individual component, as well as the row group's pinning. Otherwise, if you wanted to match it like what we have above, you just say this is 16 and this is 16. And there you go. Okay, so again on the box sizing, super important to make sure that our row groups don't shrink once, even if we specify pinning, we make sure that our sections don't shrink. And we use the same technique actually when we talk about components. To prevent the module from shrinking, even if we're assigning 16 pixel paddings to the left and right of the module, the box sizing is there to make sure that the module box or group does not shrink. So I hope that's a little bit more clear as to why it's set up that way. And of course, there may be better ways to improve this, but at the moment, it seems to be satisfying most of what I'm looking for. Now, the last thing I want to show you is how we might use some of these features inside of an application design. What's nice about this approach with AutoLayouts and weights in the stack groups feature is that you can assign a specific width to each of these. So for example, in this column, I have a 75 pixel width, and that's a hard value, meaning that if I resize the width of the canvas or the width of the artboard, it won't change. Now for the next column, you'll see that it's actually 24.82% of the width, but it has a minimum of 200 pixels and a maximum of 350 pixels, meaning that it won't shrink below 200 and it won't grow past 350. And that's really awesome because it lets us have some flexibility in the UI when we resize without necessarily stretching beyond the bounds that would look inappropriate or off. So let me show you how that works. I can go ahead and select this, and when I resize, you'll notice that the main area, the main view, is getting enlarged, but nothing has changed to this column and nothing has changed to this column, probably because this column is already at 350 pixels, meaning that we've already reached the maximum. When I shrink it down, you'll see that now the second column is starting to shrink. The first one doesn't change, but once I get down to about 200 pixels, right here, right there, it's gonna freeze. So now if I zoom in, you'll see that this column has 200 pixels. This is still a 75, and this is 100% of what's left over. So that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, please comment down below. I'm going to share this file as well so you guys can play with it, maybe a cleaner version of it. And then I'll jot down some suggestions and feature requests that I put into the team for AutoLayout, and hopefully they go ahead and implement some of those as well. Okay, thanks very much.